Ending Adultification Bias, Street Harassment, and School Dress Codes. And we have our esteemed panelists, José Garth, Dr. Britney Brinkman, and Tausha Bonner-Johnson. So I'll give us a minute to keep the introductions going via chat and check back in with you all in just one moment. All righty, so I'm going to first turn it over to our panelists to please introduce themselves. I see to my right on my screen first, Dr. Britney Brinkman. Can you please tell us who you are and where you are coming from?
Yes, hello everybody. Thank you all for being here. I'm super excited to be here. I'm Dr. Britney Brinkman. My pronouns are she, her. I am an associate professor of psychology at Point Park University here in Pittsburgh. And today I am very excited to be here for the webinar today.
Thank you. And we also have José Garth. Please introduce yourself.
Hello, y'all. So happy to see so many great friends in the room and some new faces as well. My name is José Garth. I use he, they pronouns. I, as of this month, am working for myself for a company called Universal Education Services, which is a vehicle that I'm building as I move it down the road to really do the work that I've loved doing for so many years and hopefully add some equity to it. So we'll see how that goes. I will keep y'all updated.
Thank you, Jose. And we have Tausha Bonner-Johnson.
Hi, everyone. Tausha Bonner-Johnson, pronoun she, her. I am the youth organizer for New Voices for Reproductive Justice. I am wearing black rimmed glasses, and I have on a black, black blazer with some white writing on it, and I have a cute little nose ring. And I'm very happy to be here and talk with everyone.
She also has a bust down ponytail that is absolutely amazing. So we gotta give credit where credit is due. And I should introduce myself. I just assumed everyone knew who I was. My name is Tashara Halyard, she, her pronouns, and I am the research coordinator for Gwen's Girls and the Black Girls Equity Alliance. I will be your moderator for today. Thank you all for joining, and let's please keep the introductions going in the chat. I see Angela says that she's feeling sleepy today. Hope this conversation gives you a little bit of energy. Thank you for joining us, Trang, who feels busy. I understand that life for sure. Jaquela is feeling helpful. Erin is feeling grateful, and we feel the same way for everyone who is with us today. So we're going to get into the conversation. You all may be thinking, okay, how does the dress code relate to the idea of street harassment? And hopefully the panelists today are going to show or demonstrate the through line there, because at the end of the day, the webinar title says it all. It's all about adultification bias and those experiences that our girls and gender expansive youth have on a day-to-day basis. And so I'm going to turn to Tausha first for the first question. So you are from a great organization called New Voices. For folks who may not be aware, it is a reproductive justice org, and your work as a youth organizer, Tausha, touches all of the topics that we'll be discussing. So can you just kind of situate for us how you see dress code policies and street harassment being connected for Black girls and gender expansive youth?
So we know that young Black women, girls, gender expansive youth are disproportionately experiencing converging forms of victimization and trauma. Young Black women and girls, gender expansive youth are exclusively subjected to racial stereotypes, disproportionately disciplined at schools, denied body autonomy, and punished for just attempting to advocate for themselves and their peers. And even despite femme-identified Black youth experiencing the harshest consequences from these institutions that are meant to serve them, their voices are still very seldom centered in these spaces. And so their humanity is consistently violated and denied. And I'm probably going to say it a couple more times in this webinar, but inequality has been ingrained into the systems that interact with us.
Humanity has been violated and denied. That's a word. Jose, turning to you. Pittsburgh Public Schools has done work to transform the school dress code policy. Share with us, if you don't mind, some of the changes that have been done and work still to be done beyond PPS. And I'll ask for Dr. Britney to also follow up after with some additional information about that.
Yeah, so Pittsburgh Public Schools a few years ago addressed some of the issues they had within their dress code, mainly around language. So there was a lot of language in there about whether or not, appropriate or inappropriate, kind of not just the objectification piece, which the objectification is definitely a part of it, but this almost like moralizing the way people were dressing, as if, as if showing your shoulders was an intentional arousal to other people. So taking out some of the more problematic language was the move that PPS did. Pittsburgh Public Schools is the largest of school districts in this county. So they have several schools that they deal with. One of the issues and one of the things that we have to work through is how they hold individual schools accountable to policies. And right now, it seems that they don't have the will to do so. So they want to prop up autonomy over best practices, over evidence-based practices, over things that we know to be true. So when they change policy, it takes groups like this and of folks who are trying to push for something to really make that change. And the board doesn't usually make that change unless there's a really good case made to do so. And usually these are very much, like I said, evidence-based cases. They're not just, I just don't like what y'all are doing, we want to change it. That's usually not enough to get something changed. So a lot of work goes into changing it, and there's little work done to enforce it by the actual district themselves. So, we're going to get into the sex ed policy a little bit, or I guess we're actually much into sex ed policy later. But when we did the sex ed policy, two of the board members, that was like the next thing they did right after getting sex ed policy pushed through, was try to figure out how they could, as school board members, hold the school accountable to the policies that the school board was pushing through, because there's a separation of powers within the school system. And I'm not an expert in that. And every time I try to dive into it and learn a little bit more, it's really difficult because I think it's very intentionally convoluted. I think it's very intentional that it's hard to trace who to hold accountable for anything. So that way it could be like, oh, I can't do this as the superintendent. It's the school board's job. And the school board is like, well, no, we're doing what we can. Literally, you have to do this. It's like, oh, well, it's the people who are chairing certain groups that are, and it's kind of this hot potato of accountability that nobody wants to get caught with. So really, I think that's a lot of the work, is how do we strategize in a way that we can say, these are the names of the people and these are their titles and where they're sitting, who can correct this situation, and leave it to them to, respond or respond with a non-response, which I think is also a response in itself. Because, yeah, this accountability piece is a really difficult one. And Pittsburgh Public Schools does a pretty great job of pushing through good policies and initiatives. They do a horrible job at actually following through. So restorative practices I put under there, their gender-expansive policies that they did, I put on there, this dress code, the sex ed policy. We can go on and on. All these policies that go through just don't actually come to life inside of the schools. They don't come off the page and do what they should be doing. So I think that's a lot of the work, is figuring out how we hold them accountable for those.
Yeah, and we're going to get just a minute to the accountability, because I think even some people who are joining us today may have some ideas on how we can do that, because it sounds like, Britney, the issue is that we have the policy, but it's not followed up by practice. And I'm wondering if part of that might be because there is some adultification bias going on. Can you talk to us about adultification bias?
Yeah, absolutely. So for those of you who aren't familiar with this term, adultification bias is the term used to describe a particular form of discrimination where adults view kids as being older or more mature than they actually are. And this is something that we know Black girls experience frequently. And one of our really brilliant colleagues, Dr. Jamelia Blake, has done essential work in this area. So she has found consistently that adults tend to view Black girls as if they are older than they actually are. And at first it sounds like, well, that, what's wrong with that, right? But what actually happens is that they tend to sexualize Black girls at a younger age, like sort of assuming that they're older and more mature in all ways, including sexually. They also tend to perceive Black girls as needing less nurturing and protection and comfort. They're also more likely to punish Black girls more harshly than white girls of the same age. So we see this happening for Black girls here in Pittsburgh, and this definitely affects all of what we're talking about today, right? Because across their experiences in schools, outside of schools, that there's sort of these assumptions and biases and stereotypes that are impacting how adults view Black girls in the first place, and then how they treat them. So part of what Jose is talking about with dress codes is that a lot of the really problematic language in there is an interpretation, right? It's asking an adult to look at a child and interpret their body and interpret their clothing. And often that language is like, whether it's being provocative, and those are like assumptions, right? So an adult is like filtering, looking at a kid, filtering their, through this like adultification bias, and assuming that a Black girl is wearing a tank top because it's 85 degrees and humid and they're in a school that doesn't have air conditioning. But if they have this like adultification bias where they assume, oh, she's wearing that to be provocative, or she's wearing that to be sexual, where the kid might be like, I'm hot, right? Like, I'm just hot outside, right? So adults are already like assuming different things about Black girls than white girls. We know Black girls have told us that they sometimes are wearing the exact same outfit as white girls of the same age, and they are more likely to get in trouble at school, right? So we know it's not just policy, because if there was like a policy that was fairly implemented, it would be implemented the same way for all kids, right? So even when the policy is written in a way that potentially is fair, which we can talk about today, that it still relies on adults to implement it. So they're more likely to actually punish Black girls who might be out of dress code than white girls, and to like assume some kind of intentionality that like Black girls are intentionally sort of breaking or violating a dress code when they're just like dressing to try to be comfortable for their school day.
Exactly. Yeah. And it's this idea that Jose just talked about, which is to like project this moral code onto Black girls' bodies, and this idea that they're doing things to arouse someone else. So Jose, somewhere Ron DeSantis and his homies are saying, we have got to do something about these wayward children. They don't have any morals at home, and their parents are allowing them to come to school dressed inappropriately. What would your response be to people who are really adamant about the need of a dress code in schools?
There's several things that kind of come to mind for me. One is it always strikes me as very, very strange that a lot of our conservative cousins who deeply believe in liberty are the quickest ones to kind of chop away at liberty, right? We can't take their guns, we can't take this and that, and not that anyone's trying to do that, but like, literally just being able to dress comfortably is something that should be able to be done, right? Some of the arguments they have is like, well, one, like inappropriateness, it's evocative and this, right? That it's not appropriate to set somebody up for work environments, right? That it's just disrespectful to like the institution. To all those things I say, school is not a job. So a job has the ability to say something, they're paying you, right? Public schools that are public and open to the public, we should be able to go through in any way that feels most comfortable to us. There's no evidence that shows the way somebody dresses affects learning. And really, if people are so concerned about it being disturbing to somebody who's aroused by this, that should be a conversation to have with those folks who can't deal with their arousal, right? If you can't see somebody and you're like, they look really good, oh man, like what a gorgeous person, and they're not wearing a lot of clothes, and you can't handle yourself, that's a greater issue. I've been in places where I'm starving and there's food on the table, and here I am able to help myself and just, not just throw my hands in the food and start eating, or I'm still able to move through my time in that space without being completely distracted by like whatever my we'll name them biological pushes are. What we do know to be true is that when kids are given a space to be themselves, boy, do they shine. Academically, socially, emotionally, right? We know that when we objectify and put all this extra stress and what's the word, responsibility on young folks for how they're dressed, that leads to stigmatizing, right? It leads to assumptions about who these people are, about how they're dressed, right? We know that it leads to, like, we're not going to have, as far as healthy romantic relationships and even just friendships and social relationships, right? The schools are helping to give credibility to bullies, right? If I'm sitting there telling you, like, I can't believe you weren't at school, what's wrong with you, girl? Then why would one of the students say that? And not to mention how much time is being lost to classroom instruction for ripped jeans, for exposed shoulders, for, like, how can we ever prioritize what's on somebody's body over their learning? It is a place of learning. So, in my mind, if all those things are so important, admit to it being more important than classroom learning, right? Say it. We care more about how you look than how you're learning. And then we can go from there, if that's your truth. But if you're trying to say that, it's all connected, show the connection, because there isn't one. And we can show the connections to these other pieces around bullying, around self-esteem, around learning, or, like we know it's there, it is there. So yeah, first and foremost, students need to be able to be themselves. Respectability politics, I get it if you hold strong to that. I'm not saying you can't hold strong to that, but that's your bag to hold, not mine, and not the student's bag, right? So, like, let's take responsibility for ourselves as adults. If that's how you really feel, you're allowed to feel that, free country. But keep your ideas to yourself, right? I can't force my doctrine on you, other than the one that's clearly imprinted on our country's positive parts of its DNA, right? Of freedom and liberty, right? So, like, that's really stated. So if you want to take any of those away, you have to have a real strong point against it. Otherwise, leave it be.
So many gems there. Thank you, Jose. I knew you would provide the best counter to, as you say, our conservative brethren and sistren. So I want to jump into the chat in just a moment. I'll get back to Tausha, but it was something that was said here. I think it was by Kip about accountability. In PPS, in like many school districts, policy does not lead to appropriate implementation, takes oversight. BGEA has done a great job of doing this, and always more is needed. And then Jada, who is in Florida, speaking of Florida, at the Dolores Weaver Institute. Good to have you again. Just dropped a link in the chat about students protesting, it looks like, dress code in Jacksonville. So I encourage folks to click that and save that to review after the webinar. Jose got a lot of affirmation. Also, Jaquela says, I am hearing that it is not just inequitable policies, but also intrinsic biases towards Black girls and their appearance. And Cheney affirmed the idea that it is not our bag to hold. Dr. Cozy said that she's so glad that there is not a dress code policy at her son's school, and it's one less barrier, because that's really what it amounts to, right? It's another thing that impedes learning and opportunity. So where did this all kind of stem from? And I think you alluded to this, Tausha, right? Dr. Dorothy Roberts has a book entitled Killing the Black Body. It's a seminal text, and she talks about the systemic abuse of Black women's bodies. So can you put what we're seeing today into historical terms? For example, what is the root of this policing of Black girls' bodies?
I was like, historical terms, because we still going through it. So it's happening right now. But historically, Black women's bodies have been controlled from the ability to reproduce, or what reproduction was for us, from slavery, to have them to populate plantations, and to then force sterilization, experiments on our bodies from doctors, and being able and then pushing birth control. So this is just historically what has been going on over the years, from slavery up until what we see now. And I think have manifested into other attacks that have now happened. Dr. Brinkman talked about the adultification, the stereotypes that these negative narratives and stereotypes that we have, policies on our hair. I just feel like our bodies are being attacked from every angle possible. Then we have over sexualization of our bodies. Jose just talked about it, just from, I think it was Jose that just said it. And I think it really sat with me. I even wrote it down, like just from, or maybe Tashara was you, just being hot in a classroom and just maybe taking off, like I have on this blazer today, and maybe taking off a blazer and having on a tank top or a shirt like that, and that for one person being a problem and for another student it not being a problem. Young girls are getting physically abused by school officers for behaviors that other young folks are not even being looked at for, or behaviors are being over exaggerated. Just everything, every attack on our body. Again, you know, inequality has been ingrained in the way that these systems deal with us. So they're just attacking our bodies from every angle. So like the negative narratives and stereotypes, I feel like that were perpetuated in these systems from history, from slavery, has just manifested into what we're seeing happening today with our youth and how they're being looked at and the things that are being pushed onto them, and their voices are still not censored. You know, I'm a big on censoring the voices. They're not being heard. They're not being censored. And even though we know that this is widespread acknowledgement and that more needs to be done, that we need to do something, but Black women, gender expansive views are still being overlooked and dismissed. And I'm stopped there.
Yeah, no, thank you so much, Tausha. I mean, there's also a gender identity part of this conversation as well that we should probably bring into the discussion, because so much of this is normative, right, around how girls should dress, how boys should dress. That is a problematic narrative. But outside of that, I'll say, Tausha, thank you for that historical context, because I'm sure someone is saying, well, all kids have to follow the dress code. Why are we just talking about Black girls' bodies today? And it's because of what Britney and Jose and you have already said, that the dress code is not being implemented equitably, right? It is about the fact that our bodies are being policed to a greater degree because of their hypersexualization, or that idea being foisted upon our girls, or the adultification bias that is at play. So I want to come to you, Dr. Britney, because the question is, what do we do? What do we do about this issue? We try with the Black Girls Equity Alliance to be as solution-oriented as possible. We have many policy recommendations. We have one actually around dress code in our local and state policy agenda. But from your perspective, what needs to change for this idea to start to change?
Yeah, so, you know, I'll say that, you know, front that I'm an advocate for eliminating dress codes completely. I really think that that is our best avenue for solving this problem. I think everything Jose and Tausha said about the rationale for having dress codes, that we don't actually have any evidence that they do anything positive in schools for kids of any identity. And we have lots of evidence of the harm that they're causing for girls, especially for girls of color, for non-binary and trans youth, for it, like we can show how harmful they are, and there's not good evidence for having them. So they are consistently written into the text. They are consistently written in such a way and implemented in a way that they really are teaching our kids sexist, racist, homophobic, and transphobic biases. So they are ways that literally adults are standing in front, often like in front of a whole classroom, and like teaching kids to look at each other in problematic ways, right? So I think that like the very idea of having dress codes is deeply problematic. We really are teaching kids to police each other's bodies. And as Jose said, like we're not talking about, you know, what do you do? And if you feel attracted to somebody, like, what do you do with that, right? So instead of like spending all this time policing kids' bodies, we could be spending time talking about consent and sex education and healthy relationships and dealing with your feelings, right? So I think the best thing to do is eliminate them. Sometimes when I say this to educators, they just like bulk, right? So I think that if the school is like going to have a dress code, then there's some things that they need to do them less harmful. So the National Women's Law Center has given us some really great recommendations for this. I think what Tausha has said is the key part, right? Youth voices need to be involved. If there's going to be a dress code, then students and their parents should have a say, especially the students, in how they're written, like what is the dress code, and they need to clearly not include gender and racial biases, which most of them do. Most of the fact, even if there's a different dress code for girls and boys, that is inherently setting up a bias. And as you said, T, like we're like completely excluding and leaving out gender expansive youth. And then if schools decide they are going to have a dress code, even if they end up writing a policy that appears on paper to be non-problematic, this piece about implementation is essential. So schools have to be willing to do deep training in implicit biases to address how teachers have been trained to implement these dress codes and undo that learning, right? They really have to actually get deeper into how adults are through these different kinds of implicit biases going to implement the dress codes, and they have to track them appropriately. I think schools are not typically doing that. They don't track how often they send kids to wear shame clothing, send them home to change their clothes, dress code them, and schools need to be doing that. They need to track that data so they can see that they are disproportionately applying. Even if they've written a fair dress code, they need to track the data to make sure that they are implementing it appropriately. So, you know, honestly, I think like there's a lot of work that has to be done for a dress code to be implemented well, that it really is probably better just to get rid of them. But if schools insist on doing them, there are ways that they can do them in a way that that they have to actively counteract. It's not just at the explicit level. You can't just say you're going to apply it fairly, because we know with implicit bias, that's not how it works. We have to be really tracking and helping people unlearn some of these assumptions.
It's just such a microcosm, it sounds like, for systemic oppression, right? Of how we see our young people, the systems at play. Speaking of oppression, just want to take a moment to give a shout out to Dr. Brittany Brinkman's newest book entitled Girls' Identities and Experiences of Oppression in Schools, Resilience, Resistance, and Transformation. I didn't think she was going to do it. So I definitely have to bring up Dr. Brinkman's newest book. It is a tremendous piece of work and scholarship. So you all should go and check that out, because it gets deeper into some of the conversations that we will be having today. But I want to turn over to Jose and to Tausha to see if you had anything you wanted to add to where do we go from here around dress code policies.
If anyone knows me, I'm for to tear it down. So what Dr. Brinkman said, just get rid of them completely.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. Like there's no way of ever actually holding anybody accountable to a dress code without these inequities coming in. Like honestly, any punitive code that exists, we know where it's going to go. Like I bet dollars of donuts that you can't find any policy that exists in or outside of a school that doesn't unfairly harm Black students, girls, queer folks, gender expansive, disabled. Like the isms exist, we know they exist. You know what I mean? So like if we're going to have any punitive things that exist, we have to really choose very wisely about how important it is, because we know harm will be done. There's no way of making these kind of punitive measures and taking things away from people for anything without it harming somebody, because we're human beings and we're flawed. So we're going to come out in a flawed way. So yeah, get rid of it. If it's not there, it won't end up being an issue, and that's really the only way I can see it not being an issue. And once again, until they actually come up with something that's actually a valid reason to do it, which I've yet to see, I think it's really dismantling these ideas that have been part of our cultural narrative for so long that we take it as like a universal truth. Like this is not a universal truth. Cleavage is not going to hurt you. You know what I mean? Ripped jeans will not hurt. Like the idea of you know, being a respectable person or being professional in these terms that we have that are like honestly coming from white supremacist place. And we all of us in this room have thought this before. You've seen somebody say something at work, wear something at work, and you're like, it's in us, right? But we're allowed to check that. We're allowed to say, like, where's this coming from? Is this an honest truth? Or is this just my feelings that I need to deal with on my own and not have to project onto somebody else or into like a greater sphere?
I love that, right? Because it also, I think, takes away some of the polarizing, like the politics behind it. It's just a matter of, is this my stuff? Or should this be forced upon other people, especially young people? And it doesn't matter where you are as far as the socio-political spectrum is concerned. So Dr. Cozy said in the chat, objectification starts in our schools, unfortunately, and carries on into the workplace too. As Jose just mentioned, there needs to be an anti-objectification of our girls of color national policy, thinking along the lines of using the Crown Act as a reference. It's a very similar situation, body versus hair or body and hair. It's still this policing of our bodies. It sounds like Dr. Cozy is saying. So I am going to launch a poll really quickly. It should be popping up there. And it's just a very simple question. Should dress codes be eliminated? We want to hear from everyone who is participating today. Now, remember, while we talk about things being amended in PPS, there are still many other school districts in Allegheny County. A dress code still does exist in Pittsburgh. PPS, for example. It's just about the ways that it is being enforced, maybe progressively or not. And so there's still work to be done. So please do fill out the poll and let us know your thoughts. And maybe at the end, for the folks who say maybe, let us know why, because I'm thinking it's probably some caveat or nuance there that we would love to hear. Okay, so we're going to switch over to the street harassment portion because these things are linked, of course. And we're going to start with Dr. Brinkman. What are we seeing regarding street harassment? And are there data to highlight our young people's experiences?
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, I think, like you said, all these topics are linked, and our youth are telling us they're linked, right? So with BGA, we did a study on sexual harassment a few years ago, and in our focus groups and in the surveys, actually, Black youth and gender-expansive youth told us, we asked them about sexual harassment, they told us about all these things. They told us about what we might sort of think of traditionally around sexual harassment in schools, but they talked about dress coding in schools and the ways it's teaching these sexualizing messages. And they also talked about their experiences of street harassment. So for our young people, all of these things are all tied together in their experiences of having their bodies policed, of being sexualized by adults, and of not getting support and from other adults, right? Whether it's in school or outside of school. So we know in terms of street harassment that we've heard our youth tell us about their experiences here. There are a couple of national studies that we can turn to just to try to get some numbers. Stop Street Harassment is an organization that's worked on this issue for a number of years. They found in a 2014 survey that about 60% of women reported experiencing street harassment. Another more recent collective did a survey in 2019. They asked 2,200 participants and found that 71% of female identified participants had experienced street harassment. We also know some of my colleagues here at Point Park have done some research with Point Park students. They surveyed about 350 undergrads, and 80% of female identified students reported having experienced street harassment. So we do need some more data locally. We know it's happening, and I think figuring out a little bit more about exactly sort of where it's taking place in Pittsburgh, especially downtown, and also the ways that it's impacting our young people, and what's happening around them, right? So, often when someone experiences street harassment, they're not the only two people on the street, right? There are other people around. And one of the things that really stood out to me when we talked to, we did focus groups with young people, was that how it felt to know that there were other adults watching, right? That they were being harassed by adults, they were being followed by adults, often downtown, and that there were other adults just not intervening and not doing anything. So, so we do know it's a problem, but we definitely need some more information and definitely more awareness locally about the scope of the problem.
Thank you. I mean, not surprising. It sounds like for the little data that we do have, the problem is pervasive. Like this is part of young people's experiences. And I think what I was shocked by, but I shouldn't have been because of my own just anecdotal experiences as a young person growing up, is the degree to which, if we're talking about at least within or around schools, that the adults who are tied to the school, the resource officers, the educators, the custodial staff, are also playing a role in this as well. And so it's like you don't feel safe anywhere.
I think that's something, and I've heard that from youth all around the country in this work, especially girls and gender-expansive youth, is that exact thing. There's nowhere that feels safe. That whether they're in school, they're being harassed, to walk to school, they're being harassed, that sense of like this idea that we are sort of assuming as adults that young people should just get used to it. And sometimes that's what they're told. Like, this is just part of being a female identified person in the world. And I think that that's really problematic, right? We're, you know, it might be understandable as an adult woman who experiences street harassment, like to say, oh, this might not go away. But I think hearing young people say there's nowhere in their life that they get to feel safe, right? Like that's the core, right? This is, Tausha talked about, this is about the dignity of our young people, like that they should be able to go to school and feel safe. They should be able to walk to school and feel safe. They should be able to get on a bus and feel safe. They can't do just like these day-to-day things without having people harassing them, commenting on their bodies, whether it's a teacher or a stranger, having somebody comment on your body and like sexualize you is an experience that most people find really threatening and distracting, and like, what kind of world are we creating for our young people?
Absolutely, but it sounds like for the Black Girls Equity Alliance, Health and Wellness Work Group in particular, we are fighting back. So Jose, can you tell us a bit about the street harassment work that's taking place and what we have to look forward to?
Yeah, so in my introduction, I forgot to say that I co-convene the Health and Wellness Group with Dr. Brinkman, and you know, the street harassment work was built off of us doing work around sexual harassment in schools, and as Dr. Brinkman brought up, a lot of students didn't feel safe in the school. We were surprised by, you know, we expected them to have lots of things to talk about as far as like the boys in the school and other peers, and then realizing that like it was security guards and teachers that were like sexually harassing in schools, and that it was on their way home and to and from school that they were being harassed. You know, that really let us see that the issue was not that we didn't understand street harassment happening, but just to the extent, you know, even just locally that we see this happening. So we went through lots of iterations of how to kind of come at this. You know, we were like, okay, we can work with bus drivers and police officers to see how they can respond, or we can work inside of schools to see how the schools respond. Once again, the will is not there. There's so much more will to police bodies than there is to protect them. And that's a hard pill to swallow, but we're here to help push that pill away. So Dr. Brinkman was able to get some funds for us to do a street harassment project. Very excited to partner with them on this. It's multi-tiered, so you know, we just mentioned that we need more local data. So we are going to be collecting that. We are doing focus groups and interviews with folks to see what their experiences are, the lived experiences in this area, in this region, with a focus on downtown. We want to see what kind of harassment is being dealt with, and then also to see what values and things inside of you know, mostly boys and men exist that make them feel empowered and okay in harassing folks in the street. You know, what we really found was that a lot of these topics is hard to train folks on necessarily, and that we really need to get an emotional investment, right? How do we get somebody invested to understand? And I can speak for myself, like I was socialized as a boy, and I present masculine. I'm not getting harassed on the streets all like that. I will say when I am, it's usually like 50-year-old women, which is, but anyway, it's not an issue that I've ever felt threatened, right? I don't, it's not something that like I had an emotional connection to until I opened myself up to other people's experiences and really listened and saw that it was something that deeply affected people. Because what a lot of boys and men say to each other is like, well, I would love it if a woman hollered at me. Oh, it's a compliment. There's all these kind of justifications that are going around to fight against it. So we want to build that emotional connection. So with that data, we're going to work with students to do some art activism. And we're also going to have an event on April 20th in Market Square downtown. I believe it will be, well, I don't want to speak too soon, but most likely after the all convening of the Black Girl Equity Alliance groups on the same day. So folks can come do some work with the BGA and then come out to street harassment awareness event downtown. We have students that will be working with us to help plan that. We're going to have folks speak and have activities and really just draw attention to this, then use creative art to push this message out. And we want to use youth art. We want to use the voice of the youth to help move others to recognize this as an issue, to have folks feel empowered to be active bystanders. And once again, as active bystanders, sometimes that just means saying like, I saw that, that's horrible, I'm sorry, right? Because it's not always safe to like go yell at somebody who's harassing somebody or chase them, like that's not always a safe thing to do, but sometimes just reassuring somebody like, yeah, that was horrible, I'm sorry you went through that. Acknowledging it sometimes is just, something that we can do. So we're hoping that through the art, through the event, we bring some more awareness, we bring some more folks who kind of bring this message forward, and we have some more data to really compel folks like the Port Authority and Pittsburgh Police to engage with this and really think about what it means for them to be active bystanders and the roles that they play in this city, as folks who often are the places where this harassment is going on. So.
Thank you, Jose. And also thank you to Dr. Brinkman for dropping in the chat all of these resources. I absolutely love this flyer. This young person is so powerful. And it has all of the details about the chalk out / speak out. And immediately prior to that, I don't know if the time is confirmed yet, we will have the all BGEA meeting being held at Point Park University. And so we will have a day of activism, advocacy, and also strategizing taking place on April 20th. And so we can't wait to see you all there. But here's the thing that also really stuck out to me is that I would imagine that in this work, we're going to find that a lot of young people don't even realize that they are being harassed, or they don't have the language to describe it as problematic. And for me, Tausha, that goes back to us never getting a clear message about a right to our bodies and our bodily autonomy, which is so directly connected to the comprehensive sex ed work. So really quickly, just let us know about the value of comprehensive sex ed, how it can kind of be an antidote to some of these things as far as our young people being empowered around their own bodies and other people understanding consent, for example. And also please share with us, how do we involve more youth in this work?
So I think the need, I love the conference sex education, and I think the need for it is just overwhelming, abundant. And it ties into everything for me, especially for body autonomy. I mean, if we can't educate our youth about body autonomy and boundaries, healthy relationships, then how do they understand or know that they're in places that are dangerous to them? I think a lot of my work with New Voices in the beginning, I actually did programming, and I have switched from programming into organizing, into just youth organizing. But during programming, I realized that a lot of the youth that I worked with and talked to didn't know that these things were an issue. And I was trying to figure out how to talk about reproductive justice, comprehensive sex education, and all of these things as this whole big thing that they needed to learn about. And they taught me, it's actually breaking it down into pieces. And we started with body autonomy. We started with understanding that what rights do they have to their own body? What rights do they have to speak about how they feel about their body and to get the education that they deserve to know about their body. And it was very important to take it from that step. And that step led to understanding all the other components of, for me, comprehensive sex education. When you say it big, they still are like, I guess we kind of get it. But when you break it down into the different things, especially boundaries, healthy relationships, then they tend to understand that now these other things are wrong. So now boys will be boys is not necessarily right. And that's not something that should happen. And I don't have to deal with this harassment that is happening, like Jose said, from teachers. We got teachers I'm sorry, I might be just pointing stuff on people, but we got teachers who are harassing or who are speaking on young Black girls, gender expansive folks' bodies and what they should be wearing. And so once they understand, all the components of comprehensive sex education, then they understand that I don't have to deal with this either. So that's just kind of, for me, how it all ties in together and why they're all so important. And then we've said it here a million times, but centering the lived experiences of our young people in our communities, making sure that they know that they're heard and that this is about them. I like a lot of what we did. Even though we're having the street harassment in April, we were able to do a little pop-up in front of New Voices, and thank God my office was right there, but my idea of using that space was to meet the youth where they're at. And I think sometimes we don't do that, even though we want to help them and we have these big ideas about what they need and how we can help them and the resources, but then we put them in a place where they can't reach us. So for us to be able, especially going downtown, so going where the youth are at, centering their voices and their experiences and the things that we are doing. I really, like I was saying, I moved from programming to organizing because I had an ability to mobilize all young people around issues that were affecting young Black girls, gender expansive folks, and not just, sometimes I feel like I was preaching to the choir, giving some of this education and resources to the youth that knew they needed it or that know that they're lacking it. So to be able to bring it to a bigger stage, bring youth around, allow youth to be the ones who are speaking and leading the fights, and us men, like giving them the space they need, giving them the safe space, giving them the tools and the resources, but really letting them man the boat and do the things that is going to best suit them. So I guess I'll end with what my vision is for a society where all young Black youth are honored and given the tools and the resources they need to create the just world that they want.
That's powerful. Thank you so much. And I want to open it up also to our audience. If you have questions or thoughts for our panelists, please do share. The poll is still open. We had 33 people participate. 64% folks said yes, dress code should be eliminated. 15% said no, and 21% said maybe. So we would love to hear from you all if you would like to unmute yourselves and jump into the conversation. Let us know your thoughts on dress code or on the street harassment work that is taking place. While we wait for folks to unmute themselves, please just use the hand raising tool so that I can point to you for you to share your thoughts. But I did want to say, this is Jose, to your point about there is more will to police bodies than to protect them. On the idea around protection, I'm probably going to be today's years old when I find out what actually are the laws that may be in place, the policies, what can be enforced to protect people who are experiencing street harassment.
It's such a gray area. It's such a gray area. And this is the thing. If the majority of street harassment was gay men harassing other men, there would be a very clear boundary around this. I can assure you. If cis straight men were the ones who were dealing with this issue, no doubt in my mind, we'd have very clear boundaries, because when we talk about safety, and not us, when the system talks about safety, what they mean is, how do we protect the status quo? How do we protect those in power? So to answer your question, there really aren't any protections. And honestly, the protections that could be employed aren't the ones that we necessarily advocate for. Or at least I'll speak for myself. And honestly, like, I feel like the values of the Equity Alliance in general is not a punitive move, right? We're in a restorative. We want to know how we can be restorative about this and call people in to change behavior, because we go lock somebody up for a week or something because they were being inappropriate in the streets. They ain't coming out a better person. We want to actually build the community up, and not, this is what we said whenever we want the PPS out there about this. We're like, we need to be careful. We don't want to punish Black boys in an effort to help Black girls, right? That's not how we want to tip the scales, right? We're trying to break the scale so everyone can just be on, right? So there's not a lot of real protections, because we're not actually concerned about the real safety of Black girls or girls or gender expansive folks in general. Like, it's just not the priority, especially for law enforcement and other folks who are predominantly cis male led. So
thank you, Jose. And I'm so happy to hear you say that it's not about playing oppression Olympics or, condemning one group so that another can be marginally privileged, right? It's about changing a master narrative that exists around patriarchy and misogynoir. So thank you for that. So I want to lift up what Jada said in the chat before I go to Cheney and Sister I, which is that their concern is that eliminating the code altogether opens the door for oppressive language. We'll love to hear more about that, Jada, if you want to unmute yourself in just a moment. And then Ashley said, I had the same concern and voted maybe. So that's going to be an interesting perspective, I'm sure. But Cheney, we're going to go to you first. Please share your thoughts.
Hi, everyone. So I voted yes to eliminate it for two very specific reasons. One being a socioeconomic reason, and the other reason being that fat bodies are usually targeted the most, especially when we're talking about Black girls and body types. As someone who has been K through 12, private school, private as in education, private as in religious, very mixed with uniforms or not. And it was very clear a lot of times, like, teachers would take that as well, I guess I really shouldn't call them teachers because they weren't great at it, but they would take that time in class to really dig into students who weren't following the dress code, right? It's like, where's your blazer today? Where's your button-down shirt? Where's your tie? And more times than not, most of my peers would say, I couldn't afford it. Like, do you know how much ties are? Do you know how much a button-down shirt is or a pair of khakis are? When you're talking, especially like for some of my peers, like in what we're gonna say is like the lower socioeconomic realm, that could be the difference between a meal and a shirt for them, and I don't think a lot of people conceptualize that. And then also as someone who called themselves fat, it was always very clear that myself, my other friends who were the same size as me or the same build as me, it was very clear that the target was about, oh, well, she's just, really curvy. That skirt's really tight. This is this is that. And it's like, no, it's not. I'm wearing the exact same uniform as everybody else. And your issue is my body. And again, to what everyone has already said, the policing of bodies is just absolutely ridiculous. So that's why I said yes to completely eliminating dress codes.
Thank you, Cheney, for bringing that in also, because, this work needs to also be from a body positivity lens. So thank you so much. Sister I.
Hi, everybody. I wanted to ask a question, and I wanted to kind of push the conversation to the direction of how young people express themselves and the readiness of the policies to be resources in terms of being really, really true to what they're saying in Black and white. Because what happens oftentimes in the school district is something will get documented and something will get archived, but everybody doesn't review it. They may not be 100% aware of it. And oftentimes the community is more aware of what's going on within institutions and the institution itself for a variety of different reasons. But the way that we were talking about, monitoring the way that students dress and so on, I wonder what it would be like to really push the envelope, especially at the event that's going to be coming up soon with drag, with balls, having a drag ball, or having the ability for students to express themselves in ways that transcend what's on the body. Because when you're involved in ballroom, and if y'all can correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think Pittsburgh has a big ballroom scene among young people or among adults. But get a young gender expansive LGBTQ youth to walk face, for example. You're going to see a beauty, an exuberance, an illumination of just the royalty that they see within themselves, that has nothing to do with how little or how much clothes they have on. It's going to be about how they're serving that face, or how they're walking that catwalk. That is the interpretation of how they're walking and taking up space with a proud and a bold walk, no matter, what it is they're wearing. And there are students that are interested in having balls and doing drag and PPS, but PPS ain't ready. So it's like, we're going to focus on what you're wearing and going to do all that. But when you get the opportunity to experience it in the context of what one of the aspects of how the LGBTQ community expresses itself, then hey, let them walk that face. Let them walk catwalk. Let them be the personification and present to you the clarity, of how they see themselves. Just and because of the limited ways that and the binary of how students are being viewed, it just doesn't serve them well. So I just wanted to put that on the floor, that students are pushing the envelope in terms of how they walk, in terms of how they socialize, in terms of how they see themselves. The problem, though, is that it's not appropriate enough to kind of express themselves in that way. And I wanted to ask the panelists, like, is that unheard of, to use a ballroom approach or a drag show even, to push the envelope and be like, you're looking at it from this way, but you really want to see something? Watch what we do when we walk. Watch what we do when we put our faces on. Watch what we do when we put our clothing on. And I just wanted to see if that resonates, because some of the queer students are like, we want to have a ball, but they're not going to let us have a ball. Because what if our attire is very revealing, but that's not the same. It's just a different context, and it's 1,000% acceptable in the context of ballroom culture or in the context of drag. So I just wanted to see if you have thoughts on that, or advice, or even if there could be a ball at the event and let them walk.
I love it, and I think we're gonna have some drag queens at our event on April 20th. We haven't we don't know for sure yet, but I love that. But what it makes me think, Sister Aya, and I was thinking before you said this, and when it's tied together, is when you go to the Army, when you go to prison, they put you in a uniform, they put you in the same haircut and everything, because they want to strip away your individuality, because they want you to be something that they built for that reason. So like when we talk about professionalism and ways that we're supposed to come into this society, they're trying to strip us of individualism, right? And that is scary to them. The idea that like, I don't subscribe to gender binary, people hate that. They hate it, If I want to wear a skirt to work, I want to get side-eyed just for being comfortable. My son loves playing with gender expression. And we've had lots of intensive conversations about how he fears for his life, existing the way he wants to exist and showing up the way he wants to show up, because of people's idea of what we're supposed to get in line with, right? Tausha invoked imagination and vision. That's what we need. That's what we should be offering and opening the door to, but there's a huge fear. I couldn't imagine PPS getting over their fears to be able to provide what you're asking for, but I would love to see it. And I want to envision that as well. And I want to imagine that can be a reality, because our students deserve that. And we deserve that. When they shine like that, you can bask in that warmth. Oh my goodness. You know what I mean? Like I would love that. But that fear, ooh, it's strong. It's strong. It's a strong thing to break through. They don't want us to be individuals.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, I agree. And, we've been talking about, having drag queens at the event and really making that a space. And I think that it's part of this way that these things cross over, right? Because the experience of whether it's street harassment or getting dress coded at school, it's about somebody with sort of some kind of power, assuming that they get to decide who gets to be in the space, how you get to show up, whether you get to express yourself, whether you get to feel safe there, and really sort of pushing back to that, right? And saying, how do we get to make sure that all of our youth get to show up as their whole selves in these spaces. And so I love it. I think you're right on, it's a great idea and something we definitely can keep building on.
Yeah, thank you for that, y'all. The chat is on fire, and you all have just made a case for these webinars going back to 90 minutes instead of 60. I was trying to give you some of your time back in your day, but I don't think it's going to be able to happen. We just have way too much to discuss. And so I hate to get out of here and not lift up what's in the chat, but if you have not had a chance, please do quickly browse through, because this is one of the topics, as many of them, specifically around dress code, that we don't all agree on. And I think that is the beautiful part about being an alliance, about being a collective. We have the responsibility to figure out, where does consensus lie? Where does justice and liberty lie for our young people, even when we do not all agree, okay? So I am going to allow, because I promised Jada earlier, the last word, because I felt like her point about dress codes or eliminating it, possibly leaving room for greater oppression, was really important. And also, there are guests from Florida. So Jada, you all have the last word.
So I just wanted to acknowledge my coworker Rihanna. This was kind of a discussion between both of us.
I'm the one doing all the talking in the chat. We're just logged in under her Zoom, but she wants you all to know that, like, it's been me typing away from here, but we agree. I'm not saying anything that Jada wouldn't say.
Right.
Okay. So going back to the conversation of like opening the door for more oppressive rhetoric, right? If we like eliminate dress code altogether, and in order to be equitable, quote unquote, it will apply to everyone. And so that opens the door for like maybe a shirt that has, racist remarks on it, or, hanging a flag that has, anything. For example, we had a teacher here in Florida that was fired for having a Black Lives Matter flag.
Yeah.
And we were in a fit because we were like, that's her freedom, that's her right. But then we quickly were like, okay, wait a minute. Does that open the door for someone to have a, what is it called? Blue Lives Matter flag in their classroom? And so once we like create these like broad stroke policies of like completely eliminating it, just understand like the implication isn't always on our side. The implication doesn't always just fall. Yeah, like the policy implication just isn't always on our side, even though we would love it to be. And then there was something that happened in the
about like
what were we talking about?
Professionalism.
Oh, like what's professional, what's good, what's appropriate, what's fair. All those things are so subjective and interpretive. And that is how we get right back to like the inequitableness and the disproportionality and discipline and outcomes for Black girls and Black bodies, is that a lot of what we're talking about as professional, as good, as appropriate, is so largely rooted in white supremacist ideals, and so largely rooted in like what works for hetero Christian male kind of like ideas of goodness. And so we want to do more than make it fair. We want to do more than make it appropriate. We want to make it equitable. And equity is such a hard concept because it's so interpretive and so subjective. So I just wanted to get all that out. Sorry, y'all.
Okay. Well, we thank you so much. Again, more on this topic. And I also think Amber's point here makes a lot of sense as well. Take a poll and ask the youth what they want to wear. And that definitely goes back to everything our panelists have been talking about today, which is allowing young people to tell their stories, their truth. And really all of this work should be led by them anyway. And so we thank you all for joining us. I've only kept you 6 minutes over time. Stay tuned for our next webinar. We are in the same place at the same time. on the same day every month. Also, check out the webinar recording, which will be available very soon. Many thanks to all of our panelists. You all are dynamic. I'm so proud to be co-conspirators with you. We will see you all at March's Black Girls Equity Alliance work group meetings. Bye, y'all. Take good care.